You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. I just want to warn you. You're going to dive to the end of the cave. You're going to see these kids. They're all looking healthy and happy and smiley. Then you're going to swim away and they're probably all going to die.
Yeah, that's what Rick Stanton said to me, almost word for word, as best I could recall, when he rang me on that Thursday morning to say, I think we need you guys to come and give us a hand. And what do you think about sedating the children?
The short clip you've just heard is the opening to this week's interview with Richard Harry Harris, the Aussie cave explorer, anaesthetist, and 2019 Joint Australian of the Year. The words of warning are from Rick Stanton, the elite British cave diving group member who, along with John Valanthan, had found the Thai boys just a few days earlier. There have been documentaries, books, and a soon-to-be-released movie on this miraculous event, the greatest rescue of modern history. On November 5, Harry and his dive partner, mate and Joint Australian of the Year, Craig Challen, released their own book on the dive rescue. It's a fantastic account of what happened, and I highly recommend the book to all of you. Now, what you're about to hear in this podcast is Harry's first-hand account of the rescue, his excitement at the opportunity to participate, which was quickly replaced by the trepidation of what the rescue team faced. They almost certainly would witness the deaths of these boys and held little hope that they would be successful. But they had to try. Harry had to deal with a professional and ethical dilemma as he agreed to the plan to anesthetise the kids and then submerge them underwater for up to 3 hours to transport them out of the cave. He was vehemently against the idea, but in the end, this was the only viable option. At the very least, by doing this, they would spare the kids a slow and painful death in the cave as conditions in there worsened and infections took their toll. Now, this account focuses not only on the events, but also on the diving aspects of the rescue, how they actually accomplished the dives, the equipment they used, the conditions they faced, the skill sets, what went well, and the near misses that occurred. Now, on top of talking about the Thai cave rescue, I used the opportunity of having Harry with me to delve into his deep understanding of rebreathers, and in particular sidemount rebreathers. You might remember from my last interview with Harry, I forgot to go through this with him, so it was a great opportunity to go through that, and in particular we contrast the KISS sidekick and sidewinder with which we both have experience. My thanks again to X-Deep for their support of Speaking Sidemount and of the divers involved in the Thai cave rescue. Harry, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount.
Thanks, Steve. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, great to catch up, and we spent a few minutes off mic just reminiscing and talking a little bit about sidemount rebreathers, which we are going to cover later. But tomorrow, November 5, is the book release of Against All Odds, the story of yourself and Craig's contribution to the Thai cave rescue. And I just want to start out, I just read the promo for it, and there's a super interesting quote at the beginning of that, which is, I just want to warn you, you're going to dive to the end of the cave. You're going to see these kids. They're all looking healthy and happy and smiley. Then you're going to swim away and they're probably all going to die.
Yeah, that's what Rick Stanton said to me, almost word for word, as best I could recall, when he rang me on that Thursday morning to say, I think we need you guys to come and give us a hand. And what do you think about sedating the children? That was his brainchild, that little gem. I'd been keen to get involved in this rescue, there's no question, and Craig as well. We'd been in communication with Rick and Ben Raymanence. You know, we'd been following the story, and because we're involved in cave rescue training at least, you know, it'd be a lie to say we weren't pretty keen to get over there and give them a hand. And so maybe my boyish enthusiasm came down the line, and then Rick turned around and said that little pearl, and I went, right, good point. Maybe I should curb my enthusiasm a little.
Yeah. So when you turned up in Thailand, I mean, what presented itself to you?
it was a scene of madness. It was like a war zone. You know, we got off the bus up at the cave rescue site. Craig was actually a little bit behind me. He missed a flight. And so he arrived an hour or two behind me. So I can remember getting off the bus. And the first thing I did was open the van door, and there's this sea of cameras, like a paparazzi scrum like I'd never seen in my life. That was completely intimidating. So, you know, head down and through the crowd. And all I wanted to do was find Rick and John and talk to them and find out what the cave was like. And there were just people everywhere. You know, they say that towards the end of this rescue, there were 10,000 people on or around or inside that mountain. And I believe it. You know, it was just this tent city had grown up to support the effort. There was a food section, a clothing section. You could get a free haircut there. Mm-hmm. You could get some free rubber boots because it was just a quagmire. You can imagine just people chomping through the mud and the rain. And military everywhere, police everywhere. It was sort of chaotic, ordered madness. It's hard to describe. Yeah. But yeah, I just put my head down and headed up towards the UK diving camp to find a couple of friends and familiar faces.
Sure. And what happened when you met up with Rick and John?
Well, they were pleased to see us. I mean, they'd had a very stressful time of it. You know, they'd been there for a week by then. They knew the lay of the land very well. They were the guys who found the boys. They were the guys who laid the line through the cave. I mean, let's not forget what an extraordinary dive that was. You know, to battle your way into very powerful floodwaters, zero visibility, a cave you've never been in before. No real sense of how dangerous it was, probably. I mean, you know, they didn't know whether a big flood pulse was about to come through and just spit them out of the cave. And, you know, very, very dangerous and difficult and physical dive. And they laid, you know, a couple of kilometres of line with the help of Ben Raymond and some other guys. But, you know, the British did the lion's share of that. And to navigate through those conditions, belay a line, you know, half decently, to be honest. It wasn't just line, it was caving rope. So they're dragging these big sacks of rope through that water and then surfacing in after every sump into a canal section and, you know, wondering, is this it? Is this where we're going to find these bodies of these boys? Because everyone assumed they were dead by then. And then finally surfacing in Chamber 9, Rick told me that he took his mask off and the smell in that chamber was so bad he thought he just was going to start seeing bodies in the water. And then these little boys running down the slope, turning their lights on. I mean, talk about emotional swings and roundabouts, Jesus.
Yeah, it's quite a famous video clip now, isn't it? The discussion between John and the boys.
Yeah. And so anyway, I just really wanted to make sure that everyone is really clear that those Brits and Ben Raymond, the dives they did early on were extraordinary and put anything that we did really into perspective, I think. I don't think there's anyone else in the world who could have done that.
Yeah, and I've done some interviews with Michael Thomas and we've talked about the CDG a few times, but it really was in their wheelhouse, wasn't it, in terms of the sort of experiences they go through in their training and also in the subsequent dives as they do their exploration of dry and wet caves.
Yep, no, they're impressive units. And I remember Rick said to me early on, I said, well, what's this dive like? Because, you know, I was unfit and I'd been a bit out of practice. I thought I might not even be able to get to the end of the cave. Rick said to me, oh, Harry, you know, this cave, it's a bit sporting, but I think you'll be all right. If Stanton says this is a bit sporting, I'm in real trouble.
Yeah.
But anyway, we made it. We got there.
I know as a cave diver myself, the first time you go to a new cave, and I'm talking about gin clear water here, but the first time you go to a new cave, you are, I wouldn't say apprehensive, but you certainly show a bit of respect to what you're doing and make sure that you're paying attention to your navigation and so on. What was it like going in there the first time?
Oh, well, you're filled with apprehension, obviously. I mean, the enormity of the task. But really, the first day, it was just, let's just focus on ourselves and this dive. Just treat it like a cave dive and give it appropriate attention and respect. And I remember we have to walk about 600 metres even to get to the first dive. So you've got all your gear on. You're walking through this humid tropical cave and up hills and down dales and through rivers, and there's some little bits where you have to post yourself down a bit of a hole, and, you know, there's water falling all over you and there's troops going in and going out carrying equipment and there's pipes everywhere. It was just, you know, it was madness. It's not your normal cave diving scenario. It's normally a lot more calm and peaceful than this. Sure. And we finally get to the first spot where we have to put a tank on and go underwater. And it was just before Chamber 3. Chamber 3 was the big advanced dive base, and it was still a dive to get through into there. And it was bloody tight little dive. It was a flattener and I only went for about 10 metres, but it was full of water pipes and electricity cables. And it just felt like, this wouldn't be too bad if all this stuff wasn't in here until where the proper diving starts and we'll go through this thing. And then you pop up into chamber 3 and there's this oozy mud slope that you have to climb up and your legs sink up to your knee in this liquid mud. And I think, oh, Lord, we're not even at the beginning of the diving and I'm going through all this stuff. Then sump 4, the first proper dive, some shocking line traps and vertical sort of keyhole restrictions, all zero viz, and you just, no, I'm not up to this. And then from there, it got a lot easier. Then it was just like a bit of a slog, a couple of kilometres of hand over hand, pulling on the rope, underwater, through the water, canals, wading, a little bit of dry stuff, a few more restrictions along the way, but nothing too terrible. And then surfacing into chamber 9, I remember looking up and seeing the shimmering water. The water was a bit clear as we went in up there and a little bit deeper. And then we surfaced in this big, long canal chamber. And I thought this must be it because I knew by the colour of the line that the POMs had told us the line was going to change colour. And I was filled with a real apprehension at that point because I suddenly, as the young people say, shit gets real all of a sudden. And I just thought, wow, we're about to meet these boys and this is it. This is no longer just an adventure. This is people's lives. And I remember when I first laid eyes on them, I actually immediately relaxed when I met the kids because they were so happy and so upbeat. Their morale was amazing. They were tremendous. And, of course, they were very excited to have some visitors, as you would be, although the Brits had been going in each day to take them food. And there were now 4 Navy SEALs, including a Thai Army doctor, dual qualified Doctor SEAL and Army Special Forces guy, a bit overqualified. These 4 guys were in there keeping them company as well.
Yeah.
So, I was much more relaxed once I actually met the kids and got to know them a bit and to see what amazing people they were.
Yeah, because there's something about the Thai culture, and I think the fact that they were there and the coach himself was a monk at one stage in his life. So I think there was something about the mindset that they carry and their attitude to life, isn't there?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's their culture, their religion, or just the fact these guys are just tough country kids. Country kids are a bit tougher. And, they grow up with more practical experience in life and the world. And no doubt that life, a lot of these kids in a remote village in northern Thailand has not been straightforward at all times. So I think that life experience really put them in good stead.
Yeah, you and I spoke a little bit about that last time, didn't we, in terms of getting kids used to adventure activities and those sort of things. Yeah. So once you met the kids, and obviously Rick had come up with this plan, as you mentioned, about sedating the kids. As an anaesthetist, how did you feel about that? Oh,
I was horrified at the suggestion. In fact, I told him straight out, no, can't happen. It's impossible. It's never been done before. I was 100% confident that it would end in 100% mortality for the children. And just to expand on that a little bit, I had 3 main risks in my mind. The first was that, surely and inevitably their full face mask would fill with water over the course of a 3-hour dive. With any sort of diving mask, unless the diver actively participates in the dive and occasionally, and once you're experienced, subconsciously clears a bit of water, that mask will fill with water. And we've done some cave diving rescue training with full face masks, and I've intentionally pretended to be unconscious and found that the mask did get water in it and it was going to cause problems. What we hadn't tried, of course, was positive pressure masks, and I suspect that was the key factor in this rescue that made all the difference, and that's why that problem didn't occur. The second thing I was worried about was just that basic first aid principle that if an unconscious person doesn't have their airway supported, that, their head falls forward or whatever and their airway obstructs. And I thought that, in the course of a 3-hour dive, when in zero vis water, when the diver can't even keep an eye on their airway, at some point they'll obstruct their airway and that will be a problem. And thirdly, hypothermia. In my anaesthetic practice, as soon as you anaesthetise someone, unless you take active precautions to maintain their body temperature usually drops straight down to around 35.5, something like that. And so knowing that water, strips the heat off you much faster than air does, again, over the course of 3 hours, surely their body temperature will start to head down towards 23, the temperature of the water.
Yeah.
So I thought, if the mask doesn't fill with water or their airway doesn't obstruct, the temperature will kill them.
Yeah. Remind me, what's the normal body temperature?
About 37.
Not a good picture in the beginning in terms of the plan. Obviously, you guys, and I know the CDG have done this, have practiced taking patients who are injured out of caves and diving them out and stretchering them out and so on. But this is a whole different kettle of fish, isn't it?
Yeah, and we do that once a year down at Mount Gambier. I run a called the Sump Rescue Orientation Program, just to sort of run through that with different cave divers, just to give them a feel of the difficulty of that scenario. And it's really a preventative strategy to make people think that next time they go out to the Nullarbor, for example, and they're in a remote air chamber, because if you fall over and hit your head or break your leg, you're in a whole world of trouble, and it's going to be very difficult to bring you out. And I think that course really drives that message home. But along the way, it's given us some really valuable practical experience in all this stuff. The Brits have been doing it for a while. The French are very good at it. And actually later this month, I'm coming over to New Zealand to do a cave rescue program with some of the divers on the South Island. So
awesome.
That'll be good.
And I get asked this a lot, and without denigrating Elon, there was obviously a fair amount of controversy around his idea of creating some sort of submersible pressure chamber to try and bring the kids out. I mean, how realistic was that?
Oh, look, it was a reasonable idea, but the execution was always going to be impossible. There were a number of problems with Elon's submarine. So it was actually, I think, a pre-combustion chamber off one of the SpaceX rockets. So made of some kind of high-tech alloy and no doubt extraordinarily expensive. And the problem with space rocket components is they are very light and strong, and they're made to go up into space, but that means they don't really sink very well. So there was a massive buoyancy issue to overcome. The second thing was that Elon's suggestion was that we'd basically take the nose cone off, put a child or two inside, and then put the nose back on and swim them out. Well, you need a bit of oxygen replenishment and CO2 elimination to make that successful. And thirdly, the thing was probably just too big to fit around the corners and through the restrictions. So it was never going to fly. But, we weren't discounting any of these ideas early on, I have to say. Yeah. So any suggestions, however impractical, as it turned out, were very welcome. I'll leave the public to decide about Elon's motives, but we didn't discount it at all. And it's a bit of a shame there was a bit of argy-bargy between him and some of the Brits, but it was a little ray of sunshine for Craig. Craig and I were on the sidelines watching that little sideshow unfold.
Yeah, it's good to watch it and not be involved, isn't it? So at that point, I mean, you've said that you were against anaesthetising the kids for the reasons that you've been through, and there were many, many other solutions being sought, including trying to dry cave into another section of the cave, bore through the mountain, and so on. But at some point, it obviously got to a position where the kids couldn't be left there and you had to do something.
Yeah, so I had 24 hours really to make my own assessment of what was going on. I mean, the Brits obviously had that time on the ground and time to eliminate in their own minds all the other options, including teaching the kids to dive, leaving the kids in the chamber for the duration of the monsoon, all the water pumping efforts, alternate entrance strategies, drill rigs, you name it. Everything was being tried, and all credit to the people involved in those things. But once I dived through the cave and seen how difficult it was, once I'd seen the kids, seen the environment where this anaesthetic might take place, I guess my views hadn't changed on the likelihood of success of the anaesthesia. I still felt absolutely convinced that this will end in the deaths of some or all of the children. But I realised that no other plan had any legs at all. Even the idea of leaving the kids in there for the duration of the monsoon, which I did really explore. I thought maybe this is the right way rather than me actively killing these kids. Best let nature and the gods take its course. That seemed like a slightly easier option for me personally.
Yes.
But then I realised, there was no way to provision them with food for that period of time. Even if we could have taken enough food in there, there was probably no space to store it all. And the conditions they were living in were deteriorating, obviously, given that they'd had food and drink taken into them. The natural byproducts of that were that the environment was deteriorating pretty rapidly. The smell was something to be seen to be believed. Yeah, it was only a matter of time before they all started to succumb to various infections. A couple of the kids already had a moist cough. Their feet were sort of wet and manky for 2 weeks. They were going to die a very slow and unpleasant death if we left them. So we thought about, can we teach them to dive? Can we teach them to dive plus a little bit of sedation? And you know what, as a cave diver, it's like when you first start diving, these kids never even dived. You know, the thought of going into zero vis water, 3 hours being pushed through tight restrictions, there's no way you're going to survive that and not panic. So it became clear to me that the only way out for these kids was completely asleep, fully anaesthetised. I still thought that that will end with their deaths, but I guess the way I justified the plan to myself was that at least if they die, then they'll be asleep when it happens. And that was a pretty hard sort of decision point to reach. But once I decided that, I just felt better about the whole thing. I thought, well, you know, forever I will be known as the doctor who euthanized 13 people in Thailand, but I don't think I could live with myself if I walked away and just let them die this unpleasant death.
Yeah, it's a huge ethical dilemma, wasn't it?
Oh, terrible. And not a great justification for any sort of plan.
Obviously, there's the ethical issue, but professionally, this could have had a massive impact on you personally, couldn't it?
Oh, it would have been professional suicide, I'm sure. That would have been the end of my career. Would have had a profound personal effect on me, no doubt about that. And my wife was very worried about that, actually. She said afterwards, look, I wasn't worried about you and the cave. You know, you go off cave diving and do this stuff for many, many years. She wasn't concerned about my physical well-being, but she was very concerned about the psychological outcomes if it all went wrong. And I think she was probably on the money.
Yeah, and isn't it a funny world? We paint one picture where everything goes wrong. We paint a middle ground where it goes partially wrong, and then we get the outcome that we did get.
You know, I'm cynical enough to know that the human condition is pretty fickle, and I've said to people before that, you know, we could have done this with the same intent, the same motivation, the same level of courage and goodwill, but if all those kids had died, we would have been villains, not heroes. And so I'm not taking any of this hero stuff too seriously, Steve, because it just as easily could have, you know, been the opposite.
But isn't that the definition of it? Isn't it when you do something knowing that the outcome could be tragic and very negative, and yet you do it anyhow? Isn't that one of the definitions of heroism?
Well, I don't feel like that, because I don't feel like I had any choice. You know, this is what, you know, it came down to, and that's what all the people there resign themselves to. And, you know, if I'm a hero, then so are 10,000 other people that are involved in this thing. You know, it's just something that we felt we had to do.
And maybe that's the best way to describe it, isn't it? 10,000 people came together from all around the world and pulled off something that was miraculous.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm very proud to have been part of it. It was great.
So let's carry on. So you've met the kids now, you've dived into the cave, and you're starting to become acclimatized with the environment, the navigation, etc., and getting yourself in physically. And now we're starting to look at the kids and think about how you're going to pull off this plan. How did that proceed?
Yeah, well, so we had these 4 guys from the Thai Navy and Army in there. And when Craig and I went in there, we knew that with the window, with the weather closing rapidly, we had 2 or 3 days at best to effect this rescue. So we went in fully prepared to execute this option of the sedation, even though I was a long way off actually deciding that I'd get involved. And so I took a recipe written in Thai for the Thai doctor to read out to the kids and the other Thai guys, so that it basically explained what would happen the next day if we came back. And I was watching the faces of the kids while the Thai doctor read this out, and it basically said, you know, we'll dress you in a wetsuit, you'll come down to the water, you'll sit on Dr. Harry's lap, you'll get an injection in your leg, you're going to go off to sleep. After you're asleep, we'll put some more diving gear on you, and then you'll swim out through the cave asleep, and you wake up, you'll be in the hospital. And so I was watching the faces of these boys while he read that out, and, you know, to a kid, they were just like nodding, going, yep, we're up for that, and no sign of any anxiety. They were extraordinary, but also I think by the time you've been sitting on a bit of mud for 2 weeks, you're pretty much ready to go. So I think they would have agreed to any, you know, a flying elephant at that stage.
Sure. How did the Thai doctor feel about it?
He did give me a bit of a sideways look while he was reading it out, because this was all news to him as well, of course. But what a cool guy, you know, very professional. He gave me this look and then just carried on reading the letter. He didn't say anything like, are you mad? Which I definitely should I was. No, they were amazing guys, the Thais. Obviously, you know, the Navy SEALs, extraordinary and capable fellows.
Yeah, I always found that interesting because obviously there was the very unfortunate fatality, and having had a military background and knowing a lot of Navy divers and also SAS divers, I know the training that they do, and certainly it's not cave diving. So they're very highly skilled, very highly trained professional divers, but it's a different kettle of fish again, isn't it, going into a cave, especially under those sort of circumstances?
Yeah, and we know that history is littered with the bodies of very capable divers, open water instructors, commercial divers, military divers who think their experience is so broad that, going into a cave is just a slightly different challenge on a different day. But it is so different, and the skills and the training are so completely different to anything else that it's not something anyone can do without appropriate training and equipment. And Rick and John were very fearful that this exact thing was going to happen, to the point that they were talking about leaving Thailand, after the kids were found, because they could see all these military divers flooding into the cave. And it frightened them so much that, they just felt that to stick around was going to be to observe the attrition of some of these people. And sadly, that prediction proved to be right when Saman Gunan died. I mean, the only tiny upside, if you could say that, about the sad death of Suman was that all those military and police divers subsequently were withdrawn from the cave. And that actually made the path for us a little bit more straightforward and clear, obviously. When you're diving through a tight restriction and zero visibility, if you meet someone coming the other way, you really want them to understand the etiquette of what goes on in that. Happens to be a trained killer from the Thai Navy SEALs. You think, if he doesn't know the rules, I'm going to come off second best here because he knows how to sort me out. So we were a bit honest with all those people out of the cave.
So we've got to the point now where the kids are being briefed and they know what's going to happen the next day. Talk us through the next day.
Yeah, well, that night, actually, after Craig and I came out of the cave, during that day, the Brits and the US Air Force para-rescue team had been down at the local pool with a few volunteer Thai kids, testing out a variety of full face masks, buoyancy devices, trying to work out the best way to dress the kids if we went ahead with this plan. And they actually came up, once again, primarily Rick Stanton. I mean, the guy's a genius. They came up with a way of dressing up the kids to make them most streamlined possible and most self-contained. So a cylinder of gas strapped to their chest would act like a bit of a keel, so they would float face down nice and neutrally in the water with a buoyancy horse collar on. They found some masks that would fit. They worked out the positive pressure masks could be an advantage. So that night when we met up with them, they said, well, we worked out how to dress up the kids. We got them to play dead and we've swum around the swimming pool for a few hours, passing them around, and it seems to work. I'm going, okay, that's good. And we came out and said, well, we've dived the cave. It was well within our capabilities. We've met the kids. I'm a bit more confident about, I found a place where I could do the anaesthetic. So I guess on balance, I can't think of a better plan. So let's carry on. So the Brits were pleased to hear that, I guess. And that night we went to a big meeting with the Thai leadership and we were asked to present our plan to them. So we did that and they said, right, off you go to bed and we'll tell you the answer in the morning. So we got back to the hotel at about 2 a.m, I think. And next morning we rock up to the site at about 8 and get told at about 9 that we're all go. And 10 o'clock we get dressed and walk into the cave, ready for action.
And so let's just talk through specifically what you did with the kids. I heard ketamine was the drug that you used. And I know, talking to Eric Brown, that some of the guys along the way also had to top up the anaesthesia.
Yeah, so we had this amazing team by this stage, the 4 Euro divers, as we called them, because we couldn't really remember where they were all from. And that included Eric, who's Canadian, as you know, so he got lumped in that basket. He didn't seem to mind. He's an affable sort of bloke.
He's a go with the flow guy for sure.
And we had Klaus and Ivan and, now I'm going to forget someone. I'm going to be in trouble now. And more Brits had arrived, of course. Chris Jewell and Jason Mallinson had arrived the same day we did. In fact, they were coming out of the cave when Craig and I arrived. And then, I can't remember which day, it might have been the second rescue day, that Josh Batchley and Connor Rowe and Jim Warney arrived. Got them.
Well done.
And Miko, did I mention Miko? Anyway, great bunch of blokes, all incredibly capable. And so we worked out a plan, how can we best utilise all these people? So the plan was that I would stay in Chamber 9. The 4 premier British divers, Chris, Jason, John and Rick would take one boy each all the way through to chamber 3, so the 3-hour dive. And along the way, we would station Craig at the first stop after the first long dive. So Craig, as a veterinary surgeon, a lot of experience with anaesthesia and ketamine in particular. So he would be there as the first stopgap to help resuscitate, as we predicted would be necessary, but also, if that wasn't necessary, to help talk the other divers through their first ketamine injection, which they might have to give, because these kids were all going to need regular top-ups along the way out. Mm-hmm. So Craig was there as a little security blanket for that bit. And then we just positioned everyone else down the line so that hopefully they would be roughly at the right spot to assist the British diver when and if they might need a bit of help. And there are a couple of sections where the kids actually had to be put in a stretcher and carried over a bit of rock and stuff along the way as well. So that took a bit of manpower. So we thought we had a pretty good plan set up. There was a bit of miscommunication and, a bit of ball fumbling on the first day with people not being where they should have been. And that was primarily because every bit of the cave looked the same and half these guys hadn't been in the cave before. Mm-hmm. So, it was very hard to work out, is this chamber 4 or this chamber 6 or whatever? So some of them weren't quite in the right spot. So there were a few minor glitches, but it all got sorted pretty well for the second rescue day and then the third. So I remember very clearly that first kid and the first anaesthetic, calling him down the hill and giving him the injection. I haven't used a lot of intramuscular ketamine, used thousands of doses of it as an intravenous injection, but I really wasn't sure how long it would take as an intramuscular injection, how thorough or effective it would be. So I was on a very steep learning curve myself. But sure as eggs, the kid sort of falls asleep within 4 or 5 minutes. And in fact, so quick that I was horrified. I thought, oh God, I've given them too much. Mm-hmm. My mind was full of doubts the whole time pretty much. Right. Anyway, then you're dealing with this floppy rag doll sitting on your lap. It's all suddenly very, very hard to juggle, and we're trying to get a full face mask on a rag doll, and that was hard. Everything was hard. It was just bloody awful, to be honest. Then put the kid in the water and first tentative sort of ginger test of pushing their face into the water, which felt a very wrong thing to do in an unconscious child. Fully expecting the mask will just get water in it, and that'll be the end of this little experiment. But sure enough, it seemed to be working. The kid's breathing through the mask, bubbling away, and then, finished dressing them up with the scuba gear and sent him on his way with the first British diver. So that was a sentinel moment, I have to say, when that first child and first Brit went swimming down the canal until they disappeared around the corner out of sight and then underwater. And then I thought, well, there goes one.
Yeah, what now?
What the hell now? Yeah. At that point, I was supposed to wait for Rick to swim in from chamber 8 and let me know how that had gone. We set up that little feedback loop for the first kid because I thought, well, the first one will almost certainly die. I'll wait for Rick to come back, confirm that, and then we'll think, right, what happened? Is there something we can change, something we can improve on? And then we'll do number 2. And then if that one dies, then that's it. I'm out. I can't do any more. And that's what I had decided to myself. Mm-hmm. I forgot about the plan with Rick coming back in, so I just cracked on and did the second one. And then after the second one, I suddenly went, oops, I was supposed to have waited for some feedback on the first one.
Right.
So I waited at that point, and finally Rick came swimming in, and I just was thinking, this is going to be terrible. They've got 2 bodies now probably in chamber 8. And he goes, thumbs up, so far so good. 2 have got that far, and they're on their way out the cave, so let's go. So we did number 3 and number 4. And then, of course, I said goodbye to the kids, which was actually really difficult because, everyone was saying it could rain tomorrow, it could rain the next day, and that's it, game over. You're all out of the cave. The cave becomes completely undivable. And I thought, wow, I'm going to say goodbye to these kids. Now I've met them twice, and I'm going to leave them to die, which Rick's sort of prophecy came back to haunt me that you said at the start of the podcast. And that really, really made me feel bad, that I was going to swim away and leave these kids to the point where I felt like I should stay with them. It's just I felt terribly guilty. Then on the other hand, I had a bed in a hotel, so why would I stay in the cave?
Indeed. And I guess, what else could you do? Staying there wasn't going to solve anything. It wasn't going to make you better prepared to deal with the next day, no matter what was going to come, would it?
No, and we were running on, no sleep and not enough food and a lot of anxiety. So, we're pretty knackered. We needed a sleep each night.
Yeah. At that point, you had no idea whether any of the kids had got out of the cave completely, did you?
No, not until I got to chamber 3. So alone with my thoughts for my 3-hour dive out of the cave by myself. And actually, not entirely by myself, because when I got through to chamber 8, Rick and Craig were there with the last boy still there. I thought, well, what's the whole? Why are they still here? And the kid looked like he was dead to me. He was lying on the beach. He was blue, didn't seem to be breathing. And Craig and Rick were looking a bit anxious, obviously. So we dragged him up on the beach and put him on his side and took his full face mask off. And I lay down behind him and just put my hand in front of his face to see if I could feel any breathing, which I couldn't really. Put my hand on his belly to see if there was any respiratory movement, which I couldn't feel. Tried to feel his pulse, which is actually really hard in cold, wet divers. Got to move the hood and stuff. So I thought, well, that's it. First one, here we go. This is my prophecy has come true. So I just gave him, a bit of a jaw thrust to open his airway, just as one more check. And he suddenly took a big breath and sort of fired up again. So I was just about to give him some mouth to mouth, and then he started breathing. Mm-hmm. And then very rapidly, he actually started to wake up, and within 5 minutes, we had to give him another dose of ketamine. And this was the way for this kid the whole way out of the cave, apparently. He's just like up and down like a yo-yo. Mm-hmm. And I think that he had a bit of a chest infection, which is not uncommon in anaesthesia with kids with chest infections, for them to hold their breath and misbehave and carry on like this. So I think he was just a classic kid with a cold who doesn't behave well under anaesthesia.
Yeah, just happened to be in the cave at the same time.
Yeah, it gave me and Rick a few worrying moments, though, I can tell you.
So the end of the first day, you've got 4 kids out. How did you feel?
That first night I was actually more worried than any other time in the whole rescue. I felt like somehow we've gotten away with this today, but tomorrow the bulk in the plan will all become clear and it will all unravel. And, I just must have talked myself into a bad place, because that night I was shitting myself. I thought, this is it, what the hell are we doing? And it started raining that night as well, so I'm lying in bed listening to the rain on the roof of the hotel, and not a happy boy, I can tell you. But anyway, next day, cracked on with it. The other problem we'd had on that first day was that we all felt terrible in the cave. Mm-hmm. I was swimming into the cave on that, so this is my second dive in the cave, and I felt weak, like weak as a kitten. I was cold and shivery and a bit headachy. I thought, what is wrong with me? Maybe I've got the flu, or maybe I'm just weak. And at some point, Craig said, I've got a bit of a headache. I never get headaches when I'm diving. I thought, that's weird. I didn't really put 2 and 2 together, but that night we were talking about it and everyone had some kind of symptoms. Turns out that the filters had run out for the compressor, and someone was too shy or too embarrassed to comment on it, so they just kept filling tanks. And, there were hundreds and hundreds of fills being done, and they'd just run out of filters. So I think it was Mikko or Klaus went off and sorted that out, and the next day the gas was fine and we all felt great. In fact, the next day compared to that, I felt like a bloody lion. I thought, thank God, Harris, you're back. So that was a worry. So they could have wiped out the whole team on that first day. That would have been
imagine how terrible that would be. And you can imagine with the scene that you've got there how that could happen, couldn't you?
Oh, yeah, it was chaos. Yeah. The tyres were doing an amazing job with all the equipment, but, there were cylinders everywhere and someone just lost track, I think.
Okay, day 2. It's been raining, and I guess from your point of view, listening to what you said before, the danger level's perhaps up a little in terms of potential flooding in the cave?
Yeah, no one seemed too worried about the water in the cave. There were measuring sticks in the first part of the cave, so we looked at those. It all seemed fine. If anything, it was a centimetre further lower again, so, it was all good. Into the cave, repeat. Day 2 was pretty straightforward. Things seemed to go much better. The time came down from 3 hours to 2 hours for the Brits to transit the cave with the kids, so the system was starting to work. Everyone was in a better physical location in the cave. So we came out at the end of that day feeling slightly confident even, and I felt much better about life that night. I started to have a glimmer of hope that actually this could work, Now, I still wasn't discounting the fact that anyone could die the next day, but just had the feeling that it might be all right. And that night it pissed down, it bucketed, and the next morning everyone is very toey. Everyone's talking about the water levels in the river, a flood pulse might come through. John and Rick were especially nervous, and I think the fact that they had seen the cave in full flood, meant that they understood what this meant, whereas for Craig and I it was still theoretical. The cave had been okay for us. So we hadn't witnessed that kind of power of the water. So they were kind of chatting about it on the way in and saying, oh, maybe we shouldn't be here today. And I remember saying at one stage, okay, time out, boys. Now, look, you're really starting to make me worried. If you guys are anxious, I'm anxious.
Yes.
We just stop and have a quick briefing. Is this safe or not safe? And we decided that if on the measuring sticks the water went up even 1 centimetre, that we're all going to turn around and come out. And fortunately, that wasn't the case. Everything seems fine. Of course, you forget all that. But, it was a bit anxiety-provoking walking into the cave that morning when these two guys who you regard as the finest are voicing some concerns that really made me worried.
Yeah, it's sort of a principle of diving, isn't it? If you don't feel right about the dive, you don't do the dive. It'll be there another day, but you aren't really in that situation, are you?
No, not really. It's always harder to walk away than just be stupid and keep walking in, I think.
Indeed it is, although that's usually the wise part. Okay, yeah. Day 3. So you dive in on day 3, the water level has not come up, so you're feeling a bit better about that. What happened?
Yeah, so just repeat, more of the same. All seemed to go pretty well, got the routine down pretty well. In fact, for me, it's strange how you start to normalise this kind of bizarreness. On day 3, I felt like I'm just back in the operating theatre doing another knee arthroscopy list.
Mm-hmm.
This is routine now, we can do this. And, it was all going really smoothly. But, of course, we hadn't forgotten. But what I had maybe been putting out of my mind was the fact we've got 5 people to do on the last day, not 4, because we were sure we didn't have a day up our sleeve, particularly given all this talk of the water coming up. So we decided we had to do all 5 on this last day. And frankly, we were so exhausted, the idea of coming in one more day for one person was, out of the question. So we decided we're going to go for all 5. But we only had 4 of these particular face masks that had proven themselves to be effective. So we took in 2 other masks with us, one old Arga mask, big grey one, which is a monstrous big thing, and one little pink Ocean Reef, recreational full face mask.
Yep.
And all credit to the Ocean Reef company, they didn't make that mask for this particular mission. And it was a tiny little thing. So I thought I had accounted for all the kids along the way, their weights, their ages and so forth. So the last kid came out, the coach went earlier that day, the last kid came down the hill and I was expecting a fairly big kid, about 60 kilos. And this little boy called Mark comes down the hill. He's 29 kilos. He's the smallest of all the kids. Right. And he came and sat on my lap and I went, uh-oh, we've got a problem, because this guy's face was like this big.
Yeah.
And he just held up this Arga mask next to him and it was like 1.5 times as wide as his head. So we thought that's not probably going to work. And then we looked at the little Ocean Reef mask and we thought, it doesn't really look robust enough for this mission. So anyway, put him off to sleep, because once he's in the water with me, you've got to crack on, because they just start shivering straight away. They're immediately losing heat. They're skinny little kids. Jason Mallinson was the last guy with me. In fact, he'd done a double run. He'd taken the first kid out to chamber 8 and then come back in for the last. And so Jason and I put this Arga mask on, and predictably it was too big. It leaked everywhere. So we discounted that. So out comes the little pink job, and they've got this beautiful soft silicone seal around them, and it just was sort of wobbly and didn't look like it was going to work. And we built up the size of the kid's head by putting foam under his hood to make his head bigger. We spent about 20 minutes fiddling, trying to make this thing look like it was going to be safe, and it just never did look like it was going to be safe. Eventually I said to Jason, you know what, mate, you're just going to have to go, because it's too late to go back. This kid's cold now. He needs to go and move. I can't wake him up and start again, because there's nowhere here to recover him. I'm on this 45-degree slope, half in the water. So that's it. Good luck, mate. And Jason gives me this look like, bloody hell. And off they go. And I thought, this is it. We've come so far, and now this last boy is almost certainly going to perish. And how Jason got him out alive, I have no idea. But that Jason Mallinson is a force to be reckoned with. Yeah,
I mean, he must have protected that kid's head with everything he had. Eh?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the techniques was to tuck the kid's head underneath your own chin, so that they were protected from impact on any of the stowels and pendants in the cave. Because in the zero viz, you're just smacking your head every 5 minutes.
For those who aren't cave divers listening, there's a technique that you use in low visibility where you hold the line with one hand with real purpose and you have the other hand in front of your head so that you can protect your head from impacting. They couldn't do that.
No, not with one hand on that line. I had the privilege of taking one of the boys out through the last sump because there was an issue. Chris Jewell lost the line and swam around for 15 minutes or so, trying to find his way out again. So you can imagine by the time he popped back into the inside of the cave, in his disorientation, he was not in a great headspace to have another go. So I met up with him at that point and said, look, you sit here and gather your thoughts and I'll take the kid out through the last bit, which I was kind of excited about because I thought, well, this is the final part of the puzzle for me. I've now got to do all the little bits of this job and we'll get to take one of the boys through the cave. And so I was sort of quite pleased to have that hands-on moment with one of my patients, which I immediately regretted because that section was the worst part of the cave. That's where the most dreadful line trap and restriction were, the sort of perfect combination. Chris had lost the line because there was no way to hold the rope, at full stretch to get out of the line trap, hold the kid and find your way through this restriction without letting go of something. And so I promptly lost the line as well. Sorry, just waving goodbye to my wife.
See you, Fiona.
Bye.
So I promptly lost the line as well and, had my little moment. But fortunately managed to recover it. So right down to the last, this cave was full of surprises.
Yeah, and there was no way to fix that line trap. Obviously, you knew it was there already.
We did, but, the rope, this caving rope was stretched fairly tight around this long bend and it pulled right off to the side into this line trap. And once we knew it, of course, it was relatively straightforward to get through it when you didn't have a patient with you.
Yes.
But maybe in retrospect, we should have spent a bit of time addressing it, knowing that we had to bring the kids through. But, again, in zero viz, you didn't really know what the rest of the cave looked like anyway.
Sure. Where are you going to place the line?
Yeah. Anyway, we just dealt with it.
No, well done. I've had little tastes of those experiences. I mean, going into Engelbrecht and going down the vertical restriction there, holding onto the line the first time. It's an interesting feeling of if I let go of this line, I have no idea where I am.
That's right. You follow a rope into a crack where only a rope can fit, not a person, and you think, right, well, there's a way to solve this puzzle. Actually, you can sort of start to enjoy that in cave diving, those sort of little dilemmas.
Yeah.
But not the first time and not when you've got an unconscious boy under your arm.
Yeah, a little bit of drama. I was going to ask you about that actually because I was aware of that happening and it's great to see the teamwork, number one, and I completely get how Chris was feeling at that point, having been off the line for some period of time with not only his own life at risk, but that of the boy he's trying to take out.
Oh, yeah. It's one thing when you just got to look after yourself. But, he knew as the clock was ticking, A, he's starting to run out of gas, but B, that boy's starting to wake up. And, if the boy wakes up and he's still off the line, what happens then? I mean, it's just awful to think about. So he was under a bit of pressure.
Yeah. And I understand he found his way back following an electrical conduit or cable.
Well, that's how he found his way back into the cave. So he thought, well, here's the electrical cable on the floor I've found that must lead in and out of the cave. So unfortunately, took a 50% chance and picked the wrong direction and headed back into the cave.
Yeah, the beauty of having some dry passage as well, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting. So you carry on out of the cave and now you've got all 12 kids out. And I'm assuming Jason's run out with the kid with the Ocean Reef mask on. Obviously that worked. There wasn't any further issues with that.
No, that's right. So he actually got out. He overtook Chris, in fact. I can't remember whether it was in the dark of the sump while Chris was off the line or whether he overtook Chris after Chris popped up. Anyway, so Jason came out second to last, and then I appeared last of all with that final kid, and then Chris came out behind me. So there was a bit of a celebration going on in the chamber 3, in the big dry chamber there. And then I think it was Klaus said, don't forget the Navy SEALs have still got to come out. And I'd said to those guys, why don't you wait for a couple of hours after I go? 2 reasons. Give me a bit of space. And secondly, let the water clear a little bit, see if it'll improve visibility, because we were very worried about these guys still. I suggested they come out one at a time with a little gap in between, knowing, what it's like to come out through difficult terrain with someone coming up your backside. But they're a real team and they decided to come out as a group of 4. So I'm very pleased that they made it out safely because that could have been another tragedy unfold there.
Sure. So once the kids are out, obviously they're not necessarily safe at that point either, are they? You've got them to chamber 3. It's still really important to get them to some sort of medical attention.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of medics in chamber 3 waiting to receive them. But from there, they've still got 600 metres of dry cave rescue to do. And that was quite a big thing in and of itself. The local caving and rope climbing community and the American pararescue guys, Thai military, had all pre-rigged the cave. They'd done lots of bolting and technical rope rescue stuff in there, lots of high lines and things to try and whiz the kids out as quickly as possible. But it still took about an hour and a half to get them through that section. So they needed further doses of anaesthetic, but they were under direct medical care then. So from there out to a Thai Army field hospital for full resuscitation and warming, and then down to Chiang Rai Hospital. And they started to wake up sort of from the field hospital to the main hospital or somewhere in between. They were all in pretty good shape.
Wow. And how did they feel? How did they recount the experience?
Well, we saw them in April this year, and obviously that's one of the things I wanted to ask them. So no recollection of any underwater part of the rescue, which was the main priority for me, as well as come out alive. And no bad dreams, which can be a nasty side effect of ketamine. You can have these awful, unpleasant experiences. So no bad dreams. Yeah, I mean, perfect anaesthetic.
And the perfect outcome. Fantastic. What's happened since this? We're aware of the Australian of the Year, and many of those involved have been on the speaking tours and talking at various dive events, and there's books and movies and so on. And as I'll just remind everyone again, Harry and Craig's book comes out tomorrow, so that's November 5. So by the time this episode comes out, hopefully we've all read it and enjoyed it. It's my birthday on Saturday, so it's top of the list of my birthday gifts, so I can't wait. So
I think it's supposed to be available in New Zealand. Do you know if it's...
Yes, it is. Yeah. So Penguin have it here, and there's several retailers, and plus there's all the ebook options and audiobooks and so on. So
excellent. Oh, that's good.
So this is a diving podcast, and the story itself is so compelling. But let's talk a little bit about some more about the diving. I'm really interested in the equipment. We saw some pictures of Rick and John walking in with some of their CDG type gear, but what were you guys using?
Just to spend another moment on those jokers, because when someone looks like they look, the British term for that is to be a cockwomble. And so they fit that description perfectly, especially Rick Stanton, who's got his homemade buoyancy device with his car inner tube with multiple patches on it, and a rope sort of restraining it to his back. So, and his wetsuit with the knees torn out of it and all this sort of stuff. So can you imagine the look on the Thai Navy SEAL Vice Admiral's face when Stanton and Valanthan turn up and say, "We're here to rescue the Thai children"? They would have taken one look at these blokes and gone, "Are you the best they've got?" You know?
This is it.
I mean, I just love the CDG's attitude to this whole thing. You know, whatever it takes to get the job done, that is fine. And I like to think that I would align myself with that diving style, because it is totally effective to use the right tool for the right job. And that has certainly been the ethos of the Wet Mules diving organisation or disorganisation to try and emulate that style, I think.
Let's finish there for a second, because I think they tend to love building their own gear too, don't they? So they're it's abhorrent to them to buy anything off the shelf as opposed to building their own.
Absolutely. You know, the hardware store is the diving supply resource, not the local dive shop.
Yeah.
You know, cave divers were always the great innovators, the great builders of gear to fit the job. And that's what I like about new cave diving projects. There's no two caves are the same. And sometimes you need to improvise and overcome to work out the best tool for the job. And this kind of one style fits all sites approach never made any sense to me. And so, I will dive open circuit if it's required. I'll dive 2-3 litre open circuit cylinders if that's what's best for the job. Or I'll dive back mount cylinders, or I'll dive a side mount rebreather, whatever it is best fit for that cave. Now, there's some downsides to that, obviously. You know, it's hard to make a coherent team when everyone's wearing, different stuff, and, it's hard to dive effectively as a buddy team. But so much of that style of diving is better done as solo or small team endeavours anyway.
Yes.
With appropriate support, of course. So anyway, horses for courses. I just like that.
I hear it, and I love the attitude too. I mean, it's not necessarily what I do, but I don't do what you guys do anyhow. So we do different types of diving. So I love the whole, I don't want to call it cowboy because it's not fair, because it sounds as if it's half-assed, and it's not. it's well thought through and designed and tested and put into practice, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we joke around and we like to give the impression that we are idiots and that we haven't thought through what we're doing. But of course, it's extremely carefully considered, everything we do. And we spend a lot of time thrashing our ideas out and having very robust discussions about the best and safest way to do things. And safety is always the number one priority, even for us.
Yeah. Okay. So you and Craig in Thailand. So a new cave you hadn't seen it before. What did you choose to use?
So we took our side mount rebreathers over there, not really knowing what the cave looked like or how deep it was or anything, but we quickly worked out that combination of high flow, high workload, shallow water was very unsuitable for rebreather diving, in my view. The risk of hypoxia in that kind of environment is quite high, I feel. So, and also the risk of flooding your loop, when you're up and down through multiple sumps, carrying gear that might be a bit more fragile than open circuit gear as well. It just seemed that rebreathers were exactly the wrong tool for that job. So we left them in their bags and just grabbed open circuit gear. It's robust, it's reliable, it's bash proof, and it's, you breathe in, you breathe out, and not much can go wrong really.
Yep.
So, and because the cave was so shallow, less than 5 metres, in most areas, it meant that 3 cylinders of gas was more than enough to get us all the way to the end and back again, particularly given there was some walking and swimming areas with your head out of the water. So, so that proved to be the tool of choice. And the luxury of, having several hundred cylinders to choose from every day, we would often breathe down that first cylinder a fair bit and then just discard it, just leave it in the cave, and then use our 2 full cylinders to come out with, particularly when the boys were involved. So you could just have that extra tank out of your life.
Yeah, that's the way I guess I would think about it, is there were plenty of places to stage cylinders, take them off, leave them there, pick it up on the way back, or if you had so many, have them staged for you.
Yep, and we had a heap of sort of 3 packs of cylinders staged throughout the cave, plus some discarded cylinders that still had 80 bar in them throughout the cave. And so there was gas everywhere, I think the longest one was between chamber 8 and 9. It was about 300 metres, 20 minutes,
Right.
So as long as you started that section with a decent amount of gas, you're in good shape.
And you were diving side mount?
Yep, of course.
I had to ask.
I mean, side mount diving for sump diving is kind of a no-brainer. You can take a tank off and push it ahead of you if it's that tight. It was just short of being that tight, to be honest. There were some wriggly bits and some tricky bits, but I never felt like I was going to take a tank off. So it was all fine. And, of course, for carrying cylinders through the drier sections, it's much easier to drag them in your hands than have them on your back, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, especially when you're climbing and so on, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything else on the Thai cave rescue that you've been covering in your talks that we have missed?
I don't think so. I mean, a lot of the stuff about teamwork and decision-making, but that's probably less interesting to a diving audience. I don't know. So I think I feel like we've covered the good stuff.
Yeah, because I think the things outside of diving that are important is the pressure that you guys were under and the scrutiny and as we discussed earlier, the ethical dilemma that you yourself had. And I'm sure that flowed on to the other guys as well, because, I mean, they're all equally involved, and whether they're culpable professionally or not, it's a different outcome when things don't go well versus when they do. And that had to be playing on everyone's minds the whole time.
Yeah. I would just say that, this was the best example of amazing teamwork that I've ever been involved with. Everyone rocked up. There was no chest beating. There was no egos in the room. Everyone immediately recognised the experience and the skill that was present, and there was just immediate mutual respect. And especially for John and Rick, I have to say, again, to not sort of blow smoke up their backside too much, but when we arrived, they'd been there for a week. They had the lay of the land. They had a pretty clear plan laid out in their minds. So when we said, right, tell us what you reckon, how this will go down, they presented a plan that I immediately felt a bit uncomfortable with, just in terms of the way they thought the divers would be together and handle the kids and so forth. So I made some fairly strong suggestions, I guess, of why I felt that didn't sit well with me. And instead of just saying, how dare you come and, within 5 minutes of getting to Thailand, you think you know more than us about it, they went, okay, well, if you're not happy, let's go back to square one and just talk it through again.
Yeah.
So, there was an enormous amount of respect in the room, and I think that says a lot about those guys, that they were prepared to swallow their pride and listen to other people and be prepared to accommodate other people's concerns.
Yeah. Yeah, hard thing to do, but it probably very important to the outcome to make sure that everybody who was important to the sharp pointy end of the rescue was on the same page. Huh?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, we started to delve into side mount rebreathers when we chatted last time. I harked back to truck just before the Thai Cave rescue, right?
Yeah.
You and I met and I was introduced basically to talk to you about rebreathers. So I've been chatting to Pete Mesley and Andrew Simpson about them, and they said, "Oh, no, you need to talk to Harry. He's the guy who has the experience that you need and the knowledge that you need." And it was the very beginnings of my research into rebreathers. And before we started, you and I started talking a bit about my experiences on the Sidewinder and yours on the Sidekick. So let's just chat a bit and share a bit about rebreathers and in particular side mount from our perspective here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was a relatively late adopter of side mount rebreathers. You think about guys like Forrest Wilson and Rick Stanton, who are kind of the originators of a lot of this technology, and there are probably other people who I'll be in trouble for not knowing or mentioning, but they're the two guys that I know were pioneers in this. And, you know, Forrest Wilson invented that side mount mouthpiece that I think Air Tests went on to produce, and Rick Stanton's certainly been a big fan of that with his homemade side mount rebreather. So I first really saw one in about 2007, I think it was, when I was at the Pierce Resurgence with Dave Appley and Craig Howell and Rick Stanton. And that's when I first met Rick. So Rick rocks up to the Pierce Resurgence, and Dave Appley and some guys had been beavering away trying to explore the Pierce. And David got himself down to about 125 metres, I think around about 1999, with his homemade dual Inspo Mark 15 abomination that was called the Thunderbird 4 because it was a huge back. He'd run into some trouble at 125 metres, some problems with CO2, some problems with finding the way on, and he was kind of a bit stuck. So I was lucky enough to get on this expedition to that, and so Rick arrives with this cockwomble outfit, this side mount rebreather. Literally looks like it's been made at the home warehouse or your equivalent of
Bunnings,
Bunnings or whatever. I'm sort of going, you know, look at this thing. Anyway, jumps in the water and swims down to 177 metres. Comes back about 6 hours later and goes, "Oh yeah, it's all right." It's like, oh, that's what exploration cave diving looks like. You know, I got as far as about 137 metres, I think, and you know, for me that was a huge day out. And I had a dry suit flood and bent, and that was pretty ordinary. But this bloke standing just rocks up, strolls into the pool, 177 metres on his homemade outfit, comes back and goes, "Yep, no worries." And I just was so blown away and felt so out of my depth. And I thought, I'm not worthy, you know, this is a different league I'm playing in here. And so that was mind-blowing. And that kind of really upped the ante for me in terms of my want to learn more and to do more and to become a bit like him, you know. It was an extraordinary trip. I've been playing around with rebreathers for about, 6 years or so by then. It started with John Dalazwana, JDZ, who was one of the early adopters of the Dolphin modified into a closed-circuit rebreather with the homemade KISS-style needle valve. And when I first saw that, I thought, you know, that just makes sense. As an anaesthetist, I kind of understand what's going on in there. You know, it all just intuitive. And so I knew that rebreathers were the way forward for me. So I bought a KISS Classic, and that in the days when you could buy the kit and you could build it at home, and there was a disclaimer saying this is not a rebreather, this is just a bunch of pipes and O-rings, and if you can put it together so it looks like a rebreather, then good on you, you know. Yeah. So yeah, dived that, and then what else did I dive? Mark 15.5, a Revo, a Meg, and then we're starting to think about side mount rebreathers. We tried to build some, that didn't work too well. We got the old Tori, which was an RB80 style thing, Eastern Bloc of Europe, which was not the best thing in the world, but we turned that into a closed circuit thing, and that kind of worked, but you know, not that well. Then I got an SF2, which I didn't get along with that well, and then the Flex, which was a big step forward for me. That was a good unit, but quite big. I'm in the Sidekick by then, and thinking it's a nice size, but I don't know, there were a few things about it that worried me a little bit. Anyway, ended up on it, and I was diving with Brian Kaycook in the Bahamas and ended up buying one off him. And yeah, I like it. It's good. I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect rebreather, and well, not that I've found yet. They've all got. There's always pros and cons to everyone. If you like one thing, you've sacrificed something else. Yeah. But that's really suiting my diving at the moment, and yeah, I've used it a lot now. Yeah, interesting. As our listeners will know, I've just come back from Sidewinder training with Ed Sorensen.
And look, it's easy to drink the Kool-Aid on rebreathers as well, isn't it? Because you're making a big investment. And anytime you do that, you've obviously done your homework and you've got to believe what you hear and what you feel if you get a chance to try it out. And then you've ultimately got to take the big step and put your big boy pants on and go and buy it and do the training. And so by the time you've done that, you're financially invested and you're emotionally invested. And I'm going to be the same as everyone else, but I was super impressed. And obviously Ed's a pretty impressive guy as well in terms of what he does, what he's done. And he's an extraordinarily good diver as well. So it was really good to dive with him. He role models fantastically in terms of his process for getting in the water, his process for doing a cave dive, and then how he conducts himself in the cave. And so he was pretty hard on me. And, I've tried to build a really good skill set in terms of being great with buoyancy, great with trim, all those sorts of things. And he picked my game up, which was great. So I got better as a result of the training. But the Sidewinder itself, I love it because I'm using exactly the side mount setup that I would use open circuit. So there is no difference. There's a couple of mods to my Stealth. It doesn't really like the rear dump. And with the Sidewinder, you can't reach behind you unless you have extraordinarily long arms to reach the bottom dump, nor can you reach your butt D-rings. You can reach the drop attachments. So that's a little bit of an issue for it. It's probably the one negative that I've found so far is you can't reach behind. So he created a modification where you've got a shoulder dump and it dumps from the left side. So that worked fantastic and it's a really good mod to it. And therefore the inflator runs from the bottom. But apart from that, my side mount harness is exactly the same as I would use open circuit. You dom the cylinders the same way. There's one additional hose as your dill from your right cylinder going into your MAV, but that's it. And so getting it in the water, it was very easy to trim out. It was very easy to dive. The work of breathing is unbelievable. There's a difference from open circuit for sure. I mean, you have to drive the loop, of course, but it was quite impressive in terms of work of breathing. The only time I felt under any duress work of breathing wise was as I was learning to manage the loop. Ed kind of likes to breathe it in such a way that he feels a bit of resistance at the end of the breathing cycle, breathing in so that he knows that he's drawn the cattle lung right down. Once you've got that, I thought it was terrific. Ed dives the sidekick too, and we talked about that fairly extensively. One of the things he mentioned was the kind of bobbing of the unit as you breathe in and out. I mean, is that one of the issues that you experience? Or
I haven't found that to be such a big problem, particularly compared to the SF2, which really leaps around because the big bellows right at the base of the unit. It really, in fact, you need two clips on it to restrain it to your side to stop it leaping around like that. I've never found that such a problem with the side kick, and maybe that's, given my experience with the SF2, it doesn't feel as bad, so I don't notice it. I used to feel it occasionally, but it certainly doesn't worry me. But like all side mount rebreathers, you've got to have it in the right place. It takes a long time to get it set up right, pulled right in your armpit and really sitting snug so it breathes the best it can breathe.
Yes.
But with the counterlung as high as possible in any kind of side mount unit, I think it's tolerable head up and head down, whereas the SF2 was almost intolerable in some of those positions. And good trim, it's like any rebreather, it's pretty nice. And it's small, it's compact, and we've opted this Billy Gambrell bucket on the base of the unit and found a couple of those nice Inconel spheres to put inside that. So it's just all self-contained. And that's been a big step forward for us. I've copied Brian Cakehook's, the way he's got his set up, and it's really sweet now. I really like it, especially for sump diving and back at 3Ks and things. It's good and robust and all self-contained. So I'm pretty happy, but I would like to give the Sidewinder a spin. I might have to borrow friends and have a bit of a swim.
Oh, for sure. It's a lot of fun. The one thing I'm struggling with, and this is a very New Zealand specific issue, is that we do not have legal 2-litre O2 cylinders in this country. And I can see your jaw drop. It's unbelievable. We don't have 1-litre cylinders either. We only have 3 litres. And so we have a very, very limited supply of legal cylinders that can be filled with oxygen, and 3 litres is fine for many of the back mount rebreathers, but trying to figure out how to get a 2-litre cylinder here. I may have one. There's a very limited number. When I say limited, there might be a handful of them in the country that managed to get a special, what we call lab number here. But it's a tragedy the way things work here. It's really maddening.
That's strange because, Faber obviously make a nice 2-litre steel, and that's my go-to oxygen cylinder for most of my diving until I got this sphere sorted.
No, it's just mind-bending. And the process to get one labbed here is so complicated. And my frustration is that we've got jurisdictions like Australia, the US, and the EU where all of these cylinders are in very, very common usage, and yet for some reason here we can't seem to be able to get them approved without going through a mass. I think you have to import 100 of them, and then 3 or 4 of them have to be destructively tested.
You can't just buy one off Dive Gear Express or something and get it sent over?
Yeah, well, you can do that, but then nobody legally can fill it.
Right, except for you and your chef.
Exactly. Or not that I would ever do that.
No.
Great to share a little bit on that. So you're diving the sidekick. Are there many occasions where you're pulling that unit off and pushing it through restrictions?
No, that's my last resort. I always take my bailout cylinder or cylinders off first to do that. Mm-hmm. So Craig and I and a group have just been to Cockabiddy again in my quest to get myself to the end of the line there. I've been trying to do that since I supported Craig when he laid some line at the far end of Cockabiddy in 2008, and it's just been this little thing that I've just wanted to do, and I've been there a couple of times and failed for a variety of reasons. So we just got back and I finally swam to the far end of Cockabiddy, which was amazing.
Yes.
So there's some really good restrictions to test yourself out at the far end of that cave, and but I managed to do all those with just the cylinder off in front of me with a Y valve on it, leave the sidekick on my side. I just prefer to leave the rebreather where it is, thinking that the cylinder's more robust. But I know a lot of side mount rebreather divers are just as happy to swing their rebreather forward. I just prefer to leave that unmolested if I can. Yeah, and that's where the Sidewinder, right? Because we've got your offboard dill on the right and the bailout on the left, you can swing one of those fairly easily, or both of them. And when that happens, when you take one or both off, the cans fall down under your arms a little bit. So you do become extraordinarily streamlined. Yeah. I haven't tried that a lot yet, and I've got a long way to go building ours before I get anywhere close to that. But it seems to be another advantage. So very good. Well, guess what? I've got another interview in 5 minutes. So I'm back to back myself. I feel almost as busy as you. Well, good luck with that.
Hey, just for the listeners again, I think you've got how many interviews this week? 4 or 5?
Oh, yeah, about that.
Oh, man. On top of a day job, and I guess you want to go diving sometime as well, right?
Yeah, you can forget that for the moment. But no, I am doing a bit of medical work this week, which is nice, and only 3 or 4 talks to give this week. But next week is the book media week, so that'll be madness.
Best of luck.
Thank you, Steve. Great to chat again.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait to get my copy. I don't want to wait till Saturday. I'm going to see if I can get it tomorrow when it's
down to the shops tomorrow, everybody in New Zealand.
I had a quick look. The book, Against All Odds, Craig Challen and Richard Harry Harris, is available November 5 for US listeners. It's available on Amazon. In Australia and New Zealand, it's distributed by Penguin, and I know all of the main book outlets have it. It's going to be a ripping read, and I hope today was a little bit of an intro to that, and hearing it from the man himself, there's nothing like that. So, Harry, I appreciate your time, mate. I know how busy you are, so thank you very, very much.
No worries, Steve. Good to chat. See you, mate.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did making it. It was an absolutely amazing experience to be able to catch up with Harry. And what I loved about it was the opportunity to really zero in on the diving aspects of the Thai Cave Rescue, as opposed to just the events that happened. Miraculous as they were, I think the dives that these guys accomplished, that's the entire rescue team, from the British cave diving group members to Harry and Craig to the many others, including Eric Brown, which I interviewed earlier. Just an amazing effort. On behalf of the dive community, I'd just like to reach out to them through this podcast and thank them for the work that they did in rescuing the kids. Now, over the coming couple of weeks, I'll be working on the next episode, so I'm really looking forward to working on that as well, and look forward to meeting you again in the next episode of Speaking Sidemount. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.